We're interviewing Robert Bob Eisenstein, who was a liberator of the concentration camp, the American Army, 1945. I guess for the record, Bob, state your whole name and address now.
All right. Robert D. Eisenstein is the legal name, and my home address is 1108 Nickel Lane, Nashville, Tennessee.
Were you born in Nashville?
Oh, I was born in Clinton, Iowa, a little town on the Mississippi River. And then I came to Nashville after I graduated from college, and came down here in about 1940, and then was drafted into the Army.
Oh, so you came to Nashville before the Americans were involved in the Second World War?
Yeah, I was drafted from here.
When were you born?
In July 13th, 1916.
1916, okay. So by the time you moved here, you were in your 20s?
Yeah, so just out of school, it was 1939, so that would make me, what, 23.
Where'd you go to college?
University of Chicago.
Did you? Yeah. And then came here to do what?
Well, I came here, my father had a business association here, so I came down here to work for a food broker. And I ended up selling baby food for Gerber's baby food, and didn't like it. And then the Second World War came on. So I was drafted from here. And then during the war, I married a Nashville girl, Ann Fensterwald, and then came back here after the war. And I've lived here ever since.
When were you drafted?
I went into the Army in, I think it was in the fall of 1941. And, well, I can look it up. I checked the record to make sure when I went in the Army, because I had to look. August 1941, 13th day, August 1941. And do you want the history?
Sure.
And then I went to Fort Oglethorpe and was assigned.
That's in Georgia.
In Georgia, right out of Chattanooga. No, it's part Tennessee, part Georgia. And from there, I went to Camp Eustis for training. That's what, North Carolina? One of the Carolinas. And for basic training. And then from there, I went up to, after I finished basic training, I went to Fort Hancock, which is right out of New York City, Sandy Hook, which is a fort that guards the harbor to New York. And I got up there before war was declared. Let's see, war was declared when? In December 1941. So I was already in place there when war was declared. And I'll never forget. I was in my barracks. I had a pass to come to Nashville. It came over the loudspeaker that Pearl Harbor, the bombing of Pearl Harbor, so that all passes were rescinded. And we were issued rifles with no ammunition to guard the entrance to New York Harbor. So that's what we did for the next several days. And then things settled down and war was declared, and then the job became more serious. And
did they not give you ammunition because they had none?
They had no ammunition. There wasn't any ammunition. At least for us, there wasn't any ammunition. I was in a Brooklyn National Guard outfit. That was the assignment, and there were no bullets to give us. We had the guns, but there were no bullets, and that only lasted a short time. Shortly thereafter, we received ammunition and the proper sidearms and so on, and I had different assignments, and then I applied for Officers Candidate School, and was accepted and went to Camp Davis, one of the 90-day wonders at that time.
Where's Camp Davis, Bob?
Camp Davis is, I think, also in the Carolinas, somewhere in the Carolinas.
These were camps that came up in the Second World War, don't exist anymore.
No. Well, I don't know if they exist now, but they were brand new. Camp Davis looked brand new to me when we got there. And I finished my training there, and first assignment was to Fort Bliss, Texas, where I was assigned the cadre to form an anti-aircraft gun battalion, the 410 Anti-Aircraft Gun Battalion. And I was given the assignment as a battalion adjutant, and I remained that throughout the war. 410 remained intact. We formed the organization. We went on maneuvers from Fort Bliss, as I remember, around the desert there, and then we went on maneuvers out in California with General Patton and the Armored Corps, trained out there, and then came back cross country to New York and shipped overseas. And I landed in Africa in 1943 on Mother's Day. I remember that was Mother's Day, so that'd be in May 1943. It was right at the end of the African campaign. We landed in Oran. All of our equipment went somewhere else, so we were stranded in Oran, and we went into a staging area there till our equipment came. And during that time, they were bringing all the prisoners back from the African campaign. And then from there, when we received our equipment, we had assignments all across Africa. I went to Tunis.
This was an anti-aircraft?
An anti-aircraft
artillery,
90-millimeter guns. We were a good-sized outfit. We had 4 batteries, headquarters, medical, a medical corps. I'd say we were well over 1,000 men, and we stayed intact. The 410th. We went from Africa to I think we went into Italy, Sardinia, Corsica. We waited out the invasion of Europe in Corsica, waiting to see if we had to go in, but we were semi-mobile. We didn't have enough trucks, so we didn't go in. We were trained for Anzio, and we saved that campaign because we didn't have enough trucks. We trained with the Navy for that campaign, and then we, as I say, we waited in Sardinia until the continent was secure. Then we went into southern France. And
Could you talk about all of the sorts of action that you saw?
Well, we mostly were with the Air Corps because it was our job to guard the airfields with the so we had 90 millimeters, I said, anti-aircraft guns. And we mostly went with the Air Corps and guarded the positions or harbors. We were in Naples for a while and guarded Naples Harbor. They used our guns as artillery pieces, as well as to get aircraft. And so the trajectory is such we could use for ground fire from hills down to the sea or into the air to get the guns, to get the airplanes.
And were the bases and other places that you were protecting attacked by German aircraft?
We were attacked when we were landing in, we were attacked when we were landing in Sicily. Our boats were attacked, but we came over on LCTs or LSTs or LCDs, depending upon how we moved. And we were attacked both and we landed in Palermo, and then the worst attack was in Naples when we landed. We were with some armored corps there, and as our boats were, I don't know whether you recall this, but it was the time when Naples was bombed, and the public buildings in Naples were being blown up by the Germans. And when we landed, we were dive bombed and strafed by German aircraft, and we were in a hurry to get the guns off and get the tanks off. One vivid memory I have was we were already out, waiting to be moved out, and the tanks were coming off at these LSTs, and the ramps dropped, and there were big, thick hawsers on those boats attached to these stations on a pier. You know what I'm talking about, these great big things on a pier. And the hawsers were, tremendous in diameter. And one tank came off and severed the hawser. And that thing was like a whip, just went back and forth, knocking people down, just like toy soldiers, just all through that harbor. Everybody had to scramble to get out of the way till that stopped. Same time we were being bombed. And so we went into the closest buildings we could get to for shelter because we couldn't set up anything for our own protection. And after what seemed like eternity, but I think it was probably 10, 15 minutes, the airplanes left. And we grouped and we moved into our positions. And we stayed in a place called Nisida, which was right outside of Italy, outside of Naples. We were there for several months, and that's where we trained for Anzio, and our job there was to guard the harbor of Naples. The batteries, the headquarters was in Nisida, which was an island outside of Italy, outside of Naples, and our batteries were scattered, the gun battalion. We had 4 gun batteries. They were scattered around the harbor. And since I was an adjutant, I stayed in the headquarters with the colonel. And then we were not involved in Anzio. We did not get involved in Cassino, if you remember, going up into northern Italy. And then, as I say, we moved into southern France and worked our way up.
So this is now after D-Day.
After D-Day.
They opened up a front in the south of France,
Yeah.
and you went, what, by ship?
We went by ship and landed in southern France. Nothing happened there. Then we regrouped. It was always secured by the Allied forces by the time we got there. Then we worked our way up and got back into the battle again throughout southern France. And we were close to the Battle of the Bulge in that area. We were in, as I remember, Sarreguemines about that time, which is right on the border. And they came down to take some of our personnel to fill in for the Battle of the Bulge, which was being devastating. And I was saved because I wore glasses. I was a captain at that time, and they didn't want any gun captains with glasses. They didn't want anybody operating gun batteries, a guy who wore glasses. So I was saved on that one. And they took some men, didn't take many. And then as the war progressed, we went into Germany. I remember one place, we were in Darmstadt, Germany, which we had set up batteries, and we were going to set up a headquarters, and had been firebombed. That's one town that was absolutely obliterated. The Allied Air Corps had firebombed it. There wasn't a thing standing. And we took, our colonel decided we were going to take the only standing building in the city of Darmstadt for our headquarters. And we took over this building, and we were a sizable headquarters for that many guns. And we had settled down, and the colonel was somewhere, and all of a sudden a group of motorcycles came up with sidecars. They were the foregoers of Patton's army, which was coming along. We were attached then to the 7th. We were attached to various armies. As I recall, we were attached to the 7th Army at that time. And I forget what army he was, but he was on his way, and he was going to come to Darmstadt, and he wanted our building. Whoever the officer was that was coming up ahead of him decided we were going to have this, they were going to have this building for their headquarters. So I said, just a minute, I'm just a captain, I'll go up and talk to the colonel. And the colonel said, you tell them that this is our building and we're not going to vacate. Words to that effect. And I said, Colonel, you better come down and tell them that you're not going to vacate. He said, Eisenstein, you tell them we're not going to vacate. So I told him we're not going to vacate. And I forget what officer it was. He said, yes, you are, or words to that effect. Well, make a long story short, we left. And Patton came in. But we didn't have anything to do with Patton. That was the time when they were moving very fast. And
did you see anything of Germans during this whole period of time? Prisoners? Any?
Oh, prisoners. Yeah, we saw prisoners constantly. And we had brushes with Germans. We were not in the front lines because of the size of our guns and our positions. The only time we would see Germans, or the enemy, so to speak, is if we got in a Jeep. Like the colonel decided one day we were going to go out and reconnoiter and see just how far away our battalions were as far as the army was concerned, front line was concerned. And I remember a couple of times we were under fire. We had to get out of the Jeep. I got under the Jeep. He got under the Jeep. That sort of thing. There was crossfire. And I never was in a position where I was in a trench and fired a gun at a soldier. I never was in that position. And at one time, our battalion was along one of the Autobahns. And it was the first time I'd ever had experience with a jet. The Germans already had jets. And they used the Autobahns as runways, and they had their hangars alongside the Autobahns under revetments, and they were completely camouflaged. And we were strafed by a jet. Our battalion was strafed by a jet once when we were moving from one position to the other. And it was so fast, that was my first experience. You didn't know what had happened. You know, you were zoomed, and you were strafed, and they were gone. Fortunately, there were no casualties. They either were poor shots or too much of a hurry. But we saw damaged aircraft all up and down the Autobahns where the Allied forces had had. And going back a little bit, in Corsica, we were set up around the harbor, and we would come into play when the airplanes would come over and start bombing the harbor. Then we would go into action, and the headquarters would have its gun room where the technology wasn't what it was today. They didn't have all these all the electronic equipment, and you had mobile units, the radars that tracked the airplanes, and then in the gun room you'd have a chart of where the airplanes were, and it was the job of the gun officer for the battalion to direct the fire of the gun batteries into wherever they saw them. So that was our type of an operation.
When you describe your operation and where you really were in basically every theater on the American side in Europe. Africa, Sicily, Italy, yes. Southern France, cross into Germany. Yeah. You are a Jew. Did you know what was happening as to the Jewish people?
No, I did not. We never did receive any of this information. At least I didn't. If it came down, I never saw it. I didn't realize what was going on. I knew about it before I went in the Army because I knew what was going on in Germany. But, you know, during that period, you were thinking about yourself and the people around you rather than what might be going on in other places, really, unless it was brought to your attention. And I don't remember any information coming about the concentration camps. I really don't. And it was interesting, the two liberators that we interviewed previously had not received any word about it either. So I wasn't the only one that didn't know. Now, how I did find out about it was, as the war was winding down, we went into Germany. We set up headquarters and gun battalions in various parts of Germany as they worked their way through. We ended up the war was winding down. This was it had to be March or April of 1945. We ended up in a town called Fürstenfeldbruck, which was an air base. And it was our job to set up gun battalions around this air base to keep the Germans from coming back. And at the time we got there, it was full of prisoners. And the Allied force, whatever army it was that was in charge of that sector, had set up 4 tanks at the edge of the airfield, each corner of the airfield, which was the only way they kept the prisoners in there. These were all German prisoners. And if they went across the line, they got shot by the tanks. That was the sum of it. But shortly after we got in there, they moved out. The tanks moved out, the prisoners moved out. Where they went, I don't know, but we set up. Then the war was winding down, so we were deorganized. They took the gun battalions away from us and made us into a group headquarters for many battalions. We became, I think, 561st Group Headquarters Battalion. So we suddenly became much bigger, but didn't have any fighting capability. We weren't in direct contact with gun battalions. We were administrative. And we stayed in Furstenfeldbruck, and we took over a city block for our headquarters. And this is the first I knew about these horrors and Furstenfeldbruck was not far from Munich and not far from Dachau. As I remember, it was about an hour's drive from Dachau. The house I was in, there were several of us in this house, had a basement full of shoes. The house next to us had a basement full of human hair. The house next to that had a basement full of clothing. And this went on and on and on for about 5 houses in a city block. And the government had issued orders, or somebody had, the Army had issued orders, we were not to go down in those basements because they felt these things were booby-trapped, and there were clothing and human hair from a concentration camp known as Dachau up the road.
Let me pause right.
Review my dates for you, see if I got my dates right.
Okay, this is tape 2, June 10th, Bob Eisenstein. Bob, go back into this town. You had become an administrative unit. You took over a whole city block.
We took over a city block.
What size city is this?
Before we had been deactivated as a 410 gun battalion, we had already taken over this city block. It was a Furstenfeldbruck, as I recall, was a fairly good-sized town. It wasn't little, but it wasn't big, but it was a typical country town, sort of rural, I think.
And this was March or April?
This was probably, the war ended in May, so this
Right.
had to be latter part of March or middle March, and then April, first part of April.
And some of the houses that you had taken over had hair, shoes, clothing.
These houses had been, we put the people out, and we took over the houses.
And these things were there when
They were
you took
there.
them over.
They were there. And then one other house had nothing but records in it, which was an inventory of the people that were in Dachau, evidently. And
And now this is before the liberation of Dachau.
well, it must have been, because this is April. I think Dachau was liberated sometime in April.
Yes.
But this had to be before then, yes. I'm pretty sure.
So at least the American Army at that particular setting knew that there was the camp.
Yes.
And of course, we had known about
Yeah.
Dachau.
In fact, the AMG came in, the American military government, came in and took the records, told us to hands off of everything, took the records. I don't know if they took that stuff out of the basement or not. I don't recall that. I think the basements were sealed so that we couldn't go down there and nobody go down there. As I said before, we were informed by our headquarters that they could be booby-trapped and we shouldn't go down there and search.
Do you remember what you thought when you heard of those things being in the basements?
Well, I know we were curious. We wanted to go down and look, and I think we did. And we inquired the best we could of what was going on. And it's the story that everybody knows. Nobody in the area knew anything about it. And we were only told that it was from something being done at a camp up the road, and that's really all we knew about it. Inquiries didn't get very far, as you can understand. The populace in Furstenfeldbruck was not friendly at all. You did not walk around without sidearms. And that was true all through Germany, actually, and parts of France, because the populace wasn't friendly to any Allied army because of the fact the area had been bombed so severely. And I guess it depended upon the frame of mind of the people you were with, whether they were friends of yours, whether you saved them from something or hadn't. Like every place we went, we took over places to live for our headquarters. The batteries had tents, and they set up camps and tents, but our headquarters, we took in France, I remember in Sarreguemines, we took over a downtown street. We used a storefront for our headquarters. And then we had houses nearby where we slept, that sort of thing. And the people in those instances were friendly. I remember the lady whose house we took over took care of the house, and she was concerned we wouldn't damage the house, but she was friendly. In other towns, I remember once we were in Germany, we were at a town called Neustadt. Of course, there are a lot of Neustadts, but this was close to the Rhine. And we took over sort of so I remember now, it was sort of like a castle. And the caretaker of this castle was very friendly. And he and she, there was a couple, was interested that we wouldn't do any harm to the castle. And they came in every day to see that everything was all right, that sort of thing. But the general populace was not friendly.
So did you hear about Dachau in any other way?
No.
So how did you finally get there?
Well, while I was there, before I went out to Dachau, a knock came on the door of the house where I was. And there were several of us in there, I'd say maybe 10, 11, 12 men there. And somebody went to the door, and there was a lady at the door who wanted to see Captain Eisenstein. She knew a Captain Eisenstein was there. Well, you know, you get a little wary, and they asked questions why she wanted to see Captain Eisenstein. This was her house, and she wanted to tell Captain Eisenstein, whom she knew was a Jew, that she had saved many Jews from the Germans, and she wanted her house back. So I went to talk to her, and I don't remember what I told her, but she didn't get her house back, but I don't remember exactly what the conversation was. I remember that incident. And other incidents of the type, now this is before we were deorganized, other instances of the type, German girls would wander into the battery areas, become friendly with the soldiers, and invite the soldiers to go with them. And as soon as the soldiers went with them, they immediately hollered things like rape and caused all kinds of trouble. So the soldier got in trouble. So soldiers had to be told not to fraternize with the population. That sort of thing went on. So everybody wasn't so friendly with the American soldier. Well, at one point, I decided, I don't know. I think it was curiosity more than anything else. I wanted to see Dachau. I wanted to see what was going on at this camp. So I got a Jeep, and I took a man with me whose pictures you have in there, he was a medical corps, a sergeant in the medical corps, who could speak Yiddish. Now, I had to know something to take that man with me. Now, I've been trying to figure out why I did that, and I can't truthfully tell you why. But he and I went in a Jeep, and we went to Dachau. When I got to Dachau, it had been liberated, but probably not too far before the time I got in there. Not too much time had elapsed. I can't tell whether days or what. But when we went through the entrance, we were sprayed with DDT because of typhus. We had to loosen all our clothing. They sprayed everything all over us. We wouldn't know why. They told us because of typhus. And Dachau was right in the middle of the town. Right smack in the middle of the town. There were houses on the front side of Dachau, not necessarily on the back side, but on the front side of it was a street, and there were houses over here. Had a high, as I recall it, had a real high brick wall with barbed wire on top, and had a rather ornate entrance, a big gated entrance where you went in. We went in through that entrance. And it came to a great big wide open area. And in the front of the area, in the middle of that area, was a flagpole, and right opposite that area was a big building, which we found out was headquarters building. And in that those pictures I gave you, on the left-hand side as you went in that area, there were big cages. They're massive cages. And we found out that those held dogs, big dogs. And a man in that one of the pictures.
Do you want to
Is
take
it-
these pictures and show them as you talk?
Sure. If you want. This is a picture of me with the guy, the medic, who could speak Yiddish, in front of one of the cages. That they were empty when we got there. But those cages, as they explained to us, this fella, well, I have to jump ahead a little bit. We met, how, I don't know, but we met a Lithuanian Jew who was an inmate there. And he offered to take us around Dachau. And I have his picture, I think. Got it? This fellow, I don't have his picture. I thought I did have his picture. See, there's one of the pictures I lost. This fellow was kept alive, he explained to us, because he was a watchmaker. And he was used to make fuses on bombs. And because of his knowledge of setting watches and the inner workings of a watch, he was very useful on setting the mechanism for fuses. So they kept him alive, and he looked very well. He looked rather healthy. And he explained everything that went on in Dachau. And he told us that at certain periods of time, the inmates were lined up in that yard, and like you'd line up for reveille, and they'd turn the dogs loose. And the one that could shinny up the flagpole the fastest was the one that survived. It was a game. And that went on quite regularly. And then when we left, we hadn't met him by this time. We went on our Jeep. We went and got out of the Jeep and went into an area, and this I'll never forget. It was chilly, and the inmates were around a fire. There were a group of men around a fire. They were doing something in the fire. We went up to them to find out what they were doing in the fire. It turned out they were roasting potatoes. And while they were standing there roasting these potatoes, one man fell into the fire. Nobody pulled him out of that fire. And we ran out, this other fellow and I ran out, and we pulled him out of the fire. And we inquired the best we could, why didn't you pull this man out of the fire? These are the first potatoes we've seen. We're interested in cooking those potatoes for ourselves. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that was the idea. They were so far gone, they didn't realize this man had fallen into a fire. They were like robots. They had blank looks in eyes, that sort of thing. Everything you've read about. And so then, somehow or another, we latched onto this guy, and he started taking us around. And we drove through the barracks area. I had pictures as we went through there. These people were still lying on these shelves that you heard about where they slept. This is a picture that I took as we went by the barracks area. You had to go through some barbed wire to see it. The inmates were still there. No reaction. It was as though you weren't there. They didn't pay any attention to you at all. There was no privacy, and they didn't react in any way to what you're doing. And then this fellow took us around to another building. He said, I want to show you something. And he took us around to this building. And there's a pile of bones there. That pile are bones. Those other two people flanking me are American soldiers. These are bones that came out of the crematorium. And no odor whatsoever. And he explained to us that that's what they were. And then he took us around another area, and where we went was a place where the inmates were required to dig a trench. And these are the inmates, and it must be I who's standing in the middle of them. It looks like somebody like me. Can't tell. I'm the only uniform in there. These were inmates were pointing out to us the trench and explaining that they had to dig the trench, and you'll notice the crosses on the back of their uniforms. Then they were shot and fell into the trench. It's as simple as that. I mean, they say these things, they said those things very matter-of-factly. And from there, he took us into the crematorium. And this is what really puzzles me, because you had a speaker, Bev, at the Holocaust lecture several years ago that said in Dachau people wasn't a killing camp and people weren't exterminated there. Well, this is a picture of an entrance to the gas chamber, not the crematorium. This is the gas chamber, and on the door is a skull and crossbones. And this is where he explained to us they would line the people up naked, stripped. They were given a bar of soap and told to go in and take a shower. And instead of a shower, you know, they were gassed to death. And then we went into the crematorium, and by the time we got there, the ovens were empty. There were no bodies in the ovens, and the ovens weren't warm. The doors were open, and I'll never forget this. As I remember, there are 2 ovens, maybe 3 ovens in this particular building. Sterile clean. The building was sterile clean, and over the top, on the back wall behind those ovens, was a mural that showed people washing their hands. And under it in German it said, "Cleanliness is next to godliness." I'll never forget that. And it was very clean. Then when I came out of that building, we went down somewhere, and I saw this mound with a tarp over it. So I raised the tarp, and it was a pile of bodies, skeletons lying there, all shriveled up like they'd been pickled. No odor whatsoever. They were just lying there, piled up. And I immediately became sick and
Physically?
went somewhere else and threw up. I remember that. And then across the field, to the back of Dachau, I could see those cattle cars that you read about, where they had obviously brought the people in. There was a spur track back there, or maybe a main line, I don't know, but you could see the cars were still there. They hadn't been moved. So this fellow was explaining to us all the things that went on, and he pleading with us to take us out. He said his wife was at a camp. He spoke in Yiddish. That's where this fellow with me understood him and carried on the conversation. And he said that his wife, he felt, was in a camp nearby. Would we please take him out of the camp? Well, we couldn't take him out of the camp. There's no way we could take him out of the camp. So we apologized, I guess, and told him we couldn't do it. But he had not seen his wife, and he felt sure that she was there. There were no women in Dachau. At least he told us there were no women in Dachau. I had never heard of this and read about it anywhere, but this was a concentration camp for women somewhere in the area. Whether it actually exists or not, I don't know.
Ravensbrück was a woman's camp.
Was it?
Yeah.
I don't know how close that is to Dachau.
I don't either.
But we couldn't take him out, and then he took us in another area where the personnel that staffed the camp lived. They lived, evidently, some of them lived right on the grounds, and there were buildings like you see in an army post, American Army base today, brick buildings that house officers and enlisted men. That's sort of a compound. That's what it was. And we went through it, and it was he took us in, and they were nicely furnished. And he told us that the people that guarded the camp and operated the camp lived in these buildings. And so all in all, we spent a good part of a day there. And I came back, we left, and we tried to make inquiries of the people to see if they knew anything about it. The people, I couldn't speak German. He spoke this, Yiddish is almost German. This guy could speak. Of course, nobody was going to tell us anything. They didn't know anything was going on. The people lived in the houses. They didn't hear anything. They didn't see anything. We know they had to hear and they had to see, but nobody knew anything. And that was pretty true all through Germany. Nobody knew anything about anything. And that's pretty much my story about Dachau.
How did you feel 40? Oh, okay.
Not sure I had a picture of that guy.
Do you remember how you felt when you heard the person in our lecture series say 40 years later, Dachau was not a killing camp?
If you remember, you probably don't, but I stood up and questioned him about that. And he put me down in very short order. And I was just horrified, and I talked about it to anybody I could talk to. I mentioned it to you. And I told him, I said, I was there, and I saw it. And he said I was wrong, that there weren't any mass killings there. Well, I think that part's right. From what I've read about Dachau, there wasn't an extermination there on the scale that there were at some of these other camps. But there were killings. There's no question about that. Well, I saw the graves, I saw the bones, I saw the bodies, so I knew there were killings there. The sad part of this is, and for my part, I didn't realize the magnitude of what I had seen till I really got out of the Army and got home. And then read and became involved in Jewish affairs, and the impact of it hit me. And it reached the point where I correlated and remembered the things I saw to where I just couldn't talk about it for a while. I wasn't in a situation of danger, but I really, it was so horrible that I didn't feel very happy about talking about it either, so I didn't. And then you got me involved in this Holocaust program, and I've heard much more about everything. And but there was a period of time there where everything concerning the Army bothered you, and you had a lot of thoughts about what you'd seen and what you'd done and what had happened.
What do you feel about the liberators that you have interviewed?
Their experience was pretty much the same as mine. None of the two I talked to knew about the camps until they actually got there. They had not known about First and Fellbrook. They both were based further away, as I recall, than I was. This one man, I forget which one it was, happened to be driving by with a lieutenant. He was driving the lieutenant, and they saw this camp, and they went in. He didn't know anything about it, and I asked him specifically, because I was interested, if he had heard anything about it, and he hadn't, and the other one had not heard about it. I think after they made inquiries, they learned about it. And one of them said that material came down, as I remember, about the camp from Army headquarters. This one man was on Eisenhower's staff, as I recall, and something came out of Eisenhower's headquarters about the camps, and that all military personnel should visit a camp so they can see the horrors that were done. That's correct, I remember now, he did say that. So that they made an effort to go to the camps. But as I say, I didn't realize the impact of what I'd seen, especially as a Jew, until I got home, I guess, and really realized the horrible thing. And now it's had a real impact on me.
Mm-hmm.
To this day. It's made a very deep feeling within me. And then when I went to Israel and visited Yad Vashem, I couldn't do it. I couldn't go through Yad Vashem. Still can't to this day. Been to Israel many times. I don't go. I can't go. And I can't see these movies that come out. I didn't go see Shoah. I just very uncomfortable. I leave. I get very uncomfortable at some of the lectures we hear. I got very uncomfortable at your story when you told this last one. I have the tape of it. I get, sooner or later I'm going to listen again, but I got very uncomfortable. I guess it's just a normal reaction because when I see my children and my grandchildren, especially at a bar and bat mitzvah, I think of the horrors that those other children went through and the parents went through. And I would just relate it that way. It becomes very personal. Of course, you can emotionally hurt yourself if you dwell on these things, so you don't too much, I guess.
But you may, as you say, not see something or be able to listen, and yet you have supported education about the Holocaust. You must feel it's important for people to know, to face.
It is, and I try to impress upon my own children about what's happened and what went on. They listen, but I don't think they realize it either. What they don't. The full impact, of course, can't get to them, but they're dutiful children. They listen to their father. So, but I think they know.
Bob, I'm intrigued by one thing you say as much as anything else, that you knew to ask the man who spoke Yiddish to go with you. That there are various levels to our experiences and being that you don't remember, but there was something in you that knew.
Something triggered me to get that man.
Yeah.
But I don't know what it was. Somebody maybe that had been there, or something that happened in First and Fellbrook. I just don't know. And I'm not really sure what made me go to Dachau either. I mean, I said I wanted to see what those things in the basement and the inventory of people was all about. I must have heard something. Now, I can't recall what it was. I had to have heard something. I knew about the Nazi atrocities to the Jewish people because we ran into that all the way through. My first experience of that was in Tunis because I visited with a Jewish family and they told me about it. Now, that was my real first experience with Nazism and the SS troops. I think it was in the back of my mind all the way, and this Dachau thing might have been a culmination of all that and led me to it. But I agree with you. There's something had to make me get that man who spoke Yiddish to go with me, because it wasn't a normal thing to do. And
but maybe that's the moral in the story, that
could be.
You want something in the back of all of our minds that will nag us.
Perhaps. It could be. I hadn't thought of it that way. That could be.
Never let it go.
Bobby, do you ever feel sorry that you went there?
They visited Dachau? No. No. I don't think I was sorry I went there. It was something I should. It was something I should have known. It's something I should have had experience with. No, I can't say I'm glad I went there, but I should have been there. If I had not have gone there, I probably would have visited the camps with a Jewish group today, which would be entirely different than being there during the war. Now, I refuse to go back to Dachau. We've had opportunities to go to Dachau. We've had opportunities to go to the other concentration camps. But I refuse to go. I'm not going to go. And I do question the people that I know have been to Dachau. I question them when they come back. Nashvillians that I know have, and it's nothing like it's nothing like it was when I was there. It's entirely different. It's the whole thing. I ask them questions, and those things aren't there.
How do you feel about there being a place like Yad Vashem or the Holocaust Memorial that they're building in Washington and the other in New York?
I'm going to have to answer that that's due to you. Um, for a while, I felt that enough's enough. We keep beating this, we keep beating it, and what happened to the Jews, and it happened to the Armenians, it happened to other ethnic groups. Why do we keep on this, and why do we keep on this? But you have convinced me that it is important. And then the people that I've heard being interviewed and the stories they've heard, that I've heard from them, and the stories that we've heard, like the one today, it is important that these things are kept alive, kept before the public, especially before the Jewish community, and they are recorded. And I applaud you for the efforts that you make to keep this Holocaust series. And I'm amazed at the depth of intellectual pursuit that is carried on the Holocaust. I sometimes object to the objectivity of the speaker in dealing with the Holocaust. In fact, I raised that question once. How could you deal with it and question the motives of the people involved? Why did they do this? Why did they do that under those circumstances? That I find distasteful, but I see the importance of getting these things on the record, and especially the non-Jewish people that have made recordings, they have expressed those feelings too, that people should know about it, and especially these agencies and groups that say there were no such things as concentration camps in the Holocaust. So it's a necessary thing. I'm uncomfortable with it, and I think a lot of other people are too, because I've made inquiries, as I've mentioned to you in the past. Why doesn't the Jewish community come out en masse to these lectures? And the answer I get is, it's getting too much. And so I think that pretty much bears out what I'm trying to say, except they're wrong.
Do you have anything else you want to add?
No, I don't think so. I think that pretty well covers the small part I played, not as a liberator, but as somebody more or less visiting. Because I don't want to go into flying colors. I did not shoot my way in as some of these guys did. I didn't.
Okay. Thank you, Bob, very much.